There we go. Okay, thank you very much for coming along today. And we are really excited about a federal government review of legislation. You might ask how that can be, but we are. First, a little bit about ANZRP. We are the only not-for-profit co-regulatory arrangement approved under the federal government's National Television and Computer Recycling Scheme. We have very strong governance. Our core members are many of the leading technology companies in the world, and 6 of them sit on our board. We live by a number of principles. They revolve around responsible recycling, meeting standards, delivering on outcomes, and keeping our word. We run the Tech Collect program, which is our public-facing program. It operates about 140 sites around Australia. We predominantly work with local government. We have some retail sites, and we run a few collection events every year. On the bottom of that slide is a little bit of a report card on our last year of operation. We're in our 5th year. We're about to tick over, having recycled 110,000 tonnes of e-waste in our own right. So I was delighted in an earlier session to hear Mike Ritchie say the MT CRS is a screaming success, and I thought, yay, we finally got there, because in the early years it was a screaming disaster. So it's wonderful to have that accolade coming from a key member of the industry. Today we want to have a look at the now announced review of the Product Stewardship Act and the regulations that sit under that Act. I won't bore you with what product stewardship is. I think everyone's probably got a pretty good idea. Most of you probably know how the legislation came about and what it means. So just to cap it very quickly, in 2011, legislation was introduced. What that meant was the government put notice on industry: if you import or manufacture TVs, computers, spare parts or peripherals over certain thresholds, you will become a liable party. Being a liable party means you must fund and join a co-regulatory arrangement. At that time there were 3. It then became 5. It's now back to 4. We're looking for downward progress. So there are about 140 liable parties that fund this scheme. Funding is really important. It is not free to recycle e-waste. In fact, it's very expensive to recycle e-waste. It's 3 times more expensive to recycle e-waste in Australia than it is overseas. That has a lot to do with technology, with population base, with collection networks and experience. So we now have product stewardship legislation. In our case, the MT CRS is in its 5th year. It got over the teething problems of the early years, and market forces will play out as to where it goes from here. As I say, by any measure, the MT CRS has been a resounding success. Loads of collection points, high uptake, lots of drop-off points, and surprisingly, if you look at only the e-waste that we collect, so TVs, computers and printers make up about 30% of we categories, 30% by weight, which means that we are in fact ahead of the EU's 4 kilos per head of population target. So again, everyone says Australia's behind. We've started 10 years behind. We've got a big road to make up. We're actually there, and I'll show you some data on that. Having said all of that, we think there's room for improvement. The scheme can be enhanced. It certainly can be improved. We're very keen and have been talking for a long time about shared responsibility. And we'll look at who's on the gravy train of televisions, computers and printers, but is not assisting or contributing to the reuse or recycling of those products. We're very keen to see an increased focus on standards, perhaps adopting some of the standards that have been implemented in the EU. Things like the restriction on hazardous substances. So let's go back to the front of pipe. Let's make sure that what comes to us when it is at end of life has less lead, mercury, cadmium in those products, and put that focus back to the manufacturers to ensure that we have a safer product to deal with at end of life. We absolutely encourage and endorse the regulators around the country that regulate. And for those that could do a little more, we'd love them to do a little more. We would love to see more resources in the Federal Environment and Energies Department team. They are sorely under-resourced, and we would love to see more inspection, more validation of data and record. We'd actually love to see real chain of custody reporting, some evidence-based reporting. It does need to evolve, and it has evolved, so the review couldn't be more timely. Taking a few words from the Act, product stewardship. The Act is about product stewardship. That's encouraging. It is an approach to the environment and other impacts these products have. It controls manufacturers, importers and distributors and other persons, as yet undefined. I'll help you with that one. It is everyone. It makes a framework, a broad framework for 3 different types of product stewardship: voluntary, co-regulatory and mandatory. The regulations then go into further detail to ensure that those regulations, which tend to be about a scheme, deliver on those objects and make sure that Australia meets its international obligations and its signatories, and deals with the enforcement of the Act, collecting of data, protection of data and compliance. So, practically, how does that work? If you think on this side of the room, we've got manufacturers. Well, sorry, there aren't any. There are no manufacturers of this product in Australia, so we haven't got any of them. We have got importers and distributors. There's about 140 in this space. The team in the department gather information. They keep it very secret. They do not share it with co-regulatory arrangements. If we want information, we get it from liable parties. Can they tell us who the liable parties are? No. Go find out. So it's a mushroom scheme. We would love to have a little bit more caring and sharing. They also have a role of enforcement and compliance. They approve and vet co-regulatory arrangements. There are 4 currently. Those co-regulatory arrangements must meet preset outcomes set out in the regulations, meet a reasonable level of ease of access for the community, collect the volumes aggregated of their members, be good corporate citizens. They then, through the co-regulatory arrangements, ensure standards are met. Through the co-regulatory arrangements, they ensure the recyclers meet standards. They have no control over recyclers, but they have control over co-regulatory arrangements. And there's reporting. That's all good. No product comes in over there. All of these people are managing us. Where does the product sit? In your hands. So you buy or lease your product from resellers or retailers online, no reach. That product then sits in your business or your home. We can't go get it. You decide what you're going to do with it when you're finished with it, whether you reuse it or you send it for recycling. Not perhaps you, but about 97% of Australians don't have a clue as to what to do with it, how to do it, where to take it, or more importantly, why. So we have the uninformed making really important decisions about the environmental treatment of the products, and yet we've got this regulatory space over here dealing with all of these distributors and importers and co-regulatory arrangements, and there's no messaging. There's silence. We have a great scheme run by Planet Ark, Recycling Near You, lots of information on there. Most local councils don't know about it. They don't list it on their website. They don't tell people. It's the greatest look-up, go-to guide for how to recycle what and where. Many businesses lease their products. Most leases have a term that says at end of lease you'll return the product to us. Most leasing businesses have sold the residual value of that lease. It goes on to the remarketers, they refurbish, wipe your data and ship it offshore for another life. Our targets are not adjusted for this offshore shipping. We'll talk about that. In the domestic space, human behaviour is a wonderful thing. We paid a shitload of money for that and I'm not giving it to anybody. Oh, it's got my photos on it. I'm not giving it to anybody. So we hoard really well. We need to change some behaviours, or we need to help you get rid of that data and those photos. For a while now, we've been putting up our cradle-to-grave, poor use, cradle-to-cradle sustainable supply chain. It's not new. You'll see on this there are a number of red blodges. Those red blodges indicate where it all falls apart. It works brilliantly. The major manufacturers do the right thing. They've got sustainable supply chains. They're procuring really well. They get it to their distribution points. The regulator catches them through customs data, and that little loop around the outside edge works. However, the product sits in the hands of the uninformed. We have to get to the uninformed to make this scheme even better. Communication is key, not just for this scheme, but for any product stewardship scheme. If people know why and how, they willingly recycle. It's seriously refreshing to see how keen people are to recycle and do the right thing. In light of the Product Stewardship Act review, we've spent about 12 months undertaking some pretty serious research and have developed a white paper to inform the review. Part of that development has been to investigate all the data sources. So we have bought the ABS data and we have all customs imports. Through that, together with some behavioural studies we've undertaken through Ipsos ourselves and work with Monash University, we've been able to model both imports, the current pool of product, the behaviour of we peculiar humans as to what we do with these products, and the offshore shipping of e-waste. So you can see what happens is product comes into Australia. We didn't ever have an open inventory, so we don't actually know how big the pie was to start with, so we can only work on a moving feast. So of the product that comes into Australia, it goes into use. Depending on your particular requirements, it stays in use between 3 and 12 years, depending on what the product is. Most of that product, there is no designed obsolescence, guys. Most of that product goes to reuse either in Australia or in another country, or it goes into storage. Of all the products, particularly computers and tablets and printers, about 30 to 40% of what's landed in Australia is shipped offshore. That's a very high percentage. We want to see the target for the products, the MT CRS, reduced by that level of reuse. We would like to see it tracked. We'd love to know where it goes, what happens to it. We would like to know that those countries have an end-of-life scheme. We think there is a very diminished amount of covered product going to landfill. We think it's about 10%, which is a great outcome since, given the beginning of the scheme, it was 80% or more of this product that was going to landfill. So where's the waste? Through convergence, minimisation, lightweighting, product weights and unit numbers are coming down. This again is ABS data. We have increasing recycling targets. Right now, we are at 58%. That basically means that nearly 6 of every 10 products that land in Australia in a year will lead to one product going to e-waste. I don't think so. If you think of how long the products last and what we do with them and how we hoard them, we are on a hiding to hell if that trajectory keeps going. Last year, one co-regulatory arrangement fail to meet its target. This year, quite possibly, more will. In the early days, we had the benefit of the analogue to digital switch. There were televisions coming out to Gazoo. You'll all remember they were on every street corner. They are no longer there. The stockpiles that did exist have all but been cleaned up. So there's a challenge happening. Increasing exports. Australian e-waste is highly valued overseas. Why? They don't think we use it too hard. But more importantly, we're early adopters. We buy the best, we use it for about 3 years, business technology, and then we churn. We get new stuff. And while we don't think a 3-year-old laptop is a great thing, in India, Pakistan, most of the Eastern Bloc, they are sensational, great devices, and that's where they're going. If you look on the right of that slide, you can see we've got a reversal of what comes into the country and yet what's recycled. You can see that on the import side, televisions only make up about 30% of what's imported, and IT and printers make up the balance. And yet, what the co-regulatory arrangements recycle is the inverse of that. Why? Because the computer product is being shipped offshore and there is some legacy product from the analogue to digital switch. As that diminishes, the scheme will fail to meet its targets. There is time for a review of those targets. I mentioned our comparison to the EU and, in fact, the US. Really interesting data on the size, the populations, and if you wonder why it's so hard for 4 co-regulatory arrangements to go to Dunedoo and Nhulunbuy and Weipa and Cooperpedy and pick up one television, and we call it an environmentally sustainable scheme, you really have to scratch your head and say, this isn't sustainable. 4 co-regs all going to the same nominated towns does not work. It works in Europe, it works even in America, but it doesn't work here because of our limited population and our somewhat expansive country. You can see there we've done the maths showing that our 2.28 kilos we're collecting, this is 2016 data, if it were taken to the WE standard, so what we collect is about 30% of WE, we'd be collecting 7.61 kilos of WE. That would be higher than about 86% of all of the collections right across Europe. There are a few countries that exceed it, and they would be Norway and Sweden and Belgium. So the products we're collecting are great and high. I've touched on a number of things. There's loads and loads of things that need to happen. We need to look at international standards. We need to adopt a methodology and a standard around reuse. It's no good just saying we'll allow reuse. There needs to be a standard. There needs to be tracking and reporting. We need to ensure we have a vibrant recycling industry. Without that, no scheme will work. We need a shared responsibility. We need to educate everyone who has product in their hands at end of life on what and how to deal with that product. So education and awareness is absolutely key. We need to keep building on the standards. We would love to see and would encourage you to think about broadening the base of products that come under legislation. Right now, we go to basically any town with 2,000 people or more. We go there and we collect. If we could collect your toasters and your rice cookers and your hairdryers, we might get a third of a truck. If we could share with other schemes and they came under the same banner, we could get a full truck. We could get a full truck every time. We could optimise our logistics networks and we could make recycling more competitively priced, and we would have some of the best technology and the best recyclers in the world. We aspire to that, and we seek your support and encouragement to drive legislative change through this review. We will be releasing the key issues from our white paper in early June. It will be released or launched in Canberra with politicians of any colour or type, and hopefully a lot of press. We need to get the Bunsen burner turned up big time on this so that we can actually deliver on the aims and objectives of the Product Stewardship Act. Let's make sure these products do not damage our environment and that we do appropriately reuse and recycle them. Thank you.